Good morning, Liberty North AP and dual credit psychology students. It is virtual Wednesday, December 9th. And today we're going to start Unit 6, Learning, which is psychological learning, not academic learning. And it's actually a pretty fascinating and interesting chapter that greatly relates to your life and to who you are as a person and an individual. So it's actually a pretty fun chapter, and it's one that you will definitely relate to and see how, just for example, operant and classical conditioning impact your life. You also use them on other people. So, okay. Before we get there, I just want to remind you, make sure you have your question down. I got Kylie Daniels' presentation today. So excited to have her and her family in class tomorrow and Friday. So make sure you have your question, okay, ready to ask. And again, you're gonna have to turn that in for credit. Then also there is extra credit that has actually been going on during Unit 4, Sensation and Perception. So for the last 2.5 weeks, going on with the topic of inattentional blindness and selective attention and subliminal messages, I have been altering items in my class. I have altered a total of 7, and then I have sent the class 1 clear subliminal message throughout the last 2.5 weeks. So I'm gonna pan around the room and give you one final look. So if you can maybe see or discover the items that I have altered. And then if you want to check and consult, collaborate with your classmates. And maybe you can get all 7 items with the help of each other. Oh, didn't get the top. For some of you, this will probably make you dizzy. Okay. And again, you don't have to get all 7 items correct to get the extra credit. You get extra credit points for each item that you can correctly identify. Sorry. Okay, so just make sure you email me those. And again, probably only the people that view the live stream are going to know to email me. All right, so it's also another good advantage there. Okay, all right. So let's talk about learning. Okay, so the 2 basic principles or theories of learning in psychology are classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Okay. And they are basically our examples of what we call associative learning, okay, which is about 3/4 of your chapter. So what I wanted to do today is go over the fundamentals of classical and operant conditioning so that you have those, so that I don't have to spend time in class kind of teaching you those, and we can kind of move on to some of the more fun and interesting elements. Not that these are not, because you're definitely going to see how they impact your life pretty quickly, okay? All right, so we're going to start with classical conditioning. These are on pages 253 to 291. So again, you're going to see they take up a huge part of the chapter. And then I've got some page numbers here in blue, some important concepts in red, okay? All right, so first of all, with each theory, I'm going to give you the important names, okay? So, and actually with classical conditioning, both these names may already be in your AP notebook. But if they're not, obviously add them. And if they are there, then make sure you add this importance to them as well. So Ivan Pavlov is actually a Russian physiologist. So he was not a psychologist, but he's very prominent because, again, he discovered by accident, he discovered one of the most iconic foundational historical theories in all of psychology, which is classical conditioning. So, and I'll talk about that in his famous Pavlov's dog experiment, okay? So Ivan Pavlov accidentally discovers classical conditioning, which even today helps millions of people in therapy, okay? Now, John B. Watson, who you should already have as the father of behaviorism, is then the psychologist who read Pavlov's work about classical conditioning and realized that it could have huge significance, huge impact in psychology, and it could help millions of people. So then he's the first one that took classical conditioning and applied it to psychology, okay? So discovered it, first one to apply it to psychology and bring it into our science and our field, okay? All right. Classical conditioning is associative learning, okay, which we all do naturally all the time. We always try to pair things together or associate things together. Okay. All right. So that is a main form of our learning, and academically or psychologically. Okay. Now, in classical conditioning, the associative learning is I'm associating a stimulus with a response. Okay. So I'm associating something that's happening with a consistent response. All right. Now, so one of the examples in the book is, people are afraid of thunderstorms generally because, and there could be a variety of reasons, we are naturally startled or afraid of things that make a loud, unpredictable noise. Okay. So loud noises that are unpredictable create fear, startlement, whatever. Okay. And that happens with thunder. Okay. And then pretty soon, lightning is associated with thunder because thunder always follows lightning. Okay. So those are all stimulus responses that I have associated and learned. Okay. Also, if I've ever had, something bad happen during a thunderstorm, like my house got flooded or, anything unpredictable, I'm going to associate that with the storm, and I'm going to learn to be afraid of it as well. Okay. If you don't like certain classes, it's probably because you have associated something negative with that class. Okay. If you don't like certain people, you probably associate something negative with those people. Okay. We are constantly forming these associations, and they teach us and they learn us behaviorally. Okay. So I am learning to associate a stimulus with a response. Okay. Now, there are 4 elements of classical conditioning that you need to know. Unconditional stimulus, or US, and you can use the abbreviations because if you notice moving forward, I'm going to use the abbreviations. Okay, so unconditional stimulus is US, unconditional response is UR. And these are a stimulus response association that I have already learned or that naturally exist. Okay, so an example with thunder and lightning, we naturally learn from a very young age that loud noises, unpredictable loud noise, create fear and startlement. Okay. That's probably one of the worst things you can do to a young infant is to scare it with a loud noise. Okay. You learn that very, very quickly. Okay. So that's already existed. Okay. Now what happens then is I learn to pair loud noises, unpredictable, with thunder, then with lightning. Okay. So thunder and lightning are what we call conditioned stimulus, conditioned response, because I learned that. Okay. I learned that after pairing the loud noise with those 2 stimuluses. Okay. So my unconditional stimulus, unconditional response is naturally occurring or already learned. My conditioned stimulus and conditioned response is learned by the pairing and the associating of the 2 stimuluses together. Because I associate loud, unpredictable noises with thunder, I'm going to be afraid of thunder. Because I associate loud, unpredictable noises with thunder and lightning, I'm going to start to be afraid of the lightning. Because I do associate lightning with thunder. Right? Okay. So it's that's chaining. That's just kind of stringing together a whole bunch of stimulus responses that I'm associating together. Okay. But they work together. All right. So pre-learning already existed. I've already got it as a stimulus response. This one is conditioned. Okay. So after pairing my 2 stimuluses together, this one is learned. Okay. All right. Now, again, I think a great example would be, real quickly, is food poisoning or food sickness. Okay. And we've talked about this in class. So if I get food poisoning after eating at a restaurant, I associate that sickness with the restaurant. Okay. So again, it's not the restaurant really that made me sick. It's the bad food. Okay. So again, my unconditional stimulus, unconditional response, which already exists, is if I get sick food, I'm going to get sick. Okay. Or if I get bad food will make me sick. Right. That happens. I don't have to learn that. That's already there. But if I pair the bad food with the specific restaurant, okay, even once, then pretty soon the sickness is going to be the same response at the restaurant. So I'm going to start to avoid the restaurant. Some people, for varying degrees of time, I'm going to avoid the food because I'm associating that it made me sick, okay, one time, which could be pretty traumatic, okay? So bad food, sickness, is unconditional stimulus, unconditional response, and then I pair that stimulus with a restaurant, certain specific food. Pretty soon that food has the same sickness response, okay? And I avoid it, okay? Now, if you go to page 267, you're going to see Pavlov's dogs, okay? And his experiment in his original discovery of the theory is a great example, and they actually have kind of diagrams to help you on page 267, okay? So Pavlov was a Russian physiologist, and he was studying salivation. His theory in basic was that we actually produce, and animals produce, different levels of salivation depending on the food that we eat. So not all foods require the same amount of salivation, okay? So what he was doing is he had dogs in a kennel in his lab, and then he had tubes inserted that would then, he would feed the dogs different foods, and then they would salivate, and then he would measure the salivation to try to prove his theory, okay? Now, what he quickly discovered, which all of us know if we have a dog or a pet, if they see food, they get excited, okay? Or they start to salivate, okay? So at the sight of food, excitement and salivation, okay? All right? Now, that already existed. He didn't have to teach the dogs to be excited or salivate at the sight of food. They just did that. That's why it's unconditional stimulus, unconditional response. Now, Pavlov he started to kind of uncover and discover something very fascinating, and that is that the dogs began to salivate at the sight of other things. The bowl. They salivated at certain times of the day. They salivated at the sight of the lab tech walking in to get the food. So what he hypothesized is that all these things that are neutral, conditioned stimuluses, are starting to have the same response because they're being paired or associated, right, with the food. So he basically hypothesized anything that the dogs associate with food is going to create the same response. They're going to learn it. So they are salivating at certain times of the day because those are the times that they get fed. They're salivating at the sight of the lab tech because the lab techs come in and feed them. They salivate at the sight of the bowl because the food is in the bowl. Okay, so it's just associative learning. Anything they pair with the food is going to create the same response. Okay, so then he decided to try to find a completely neutral stimulus that did not create salivation. And he came up with a bell or a tone. And anytime he rang the bell or kind of hit the tuning bar, the dogs didn't salivate. Okay, so he decided to do his own experiment. So every time he fed the dogs, he would actually go in and ring the bell or sound the tuning fork first. So ring the bell, feed the dogs. Ring the bell, feed the dogs. Sound hit the tuning fork, feed the dogs. Hit the tuning fork, feed the dogs. Okay. And he did that for several days. And lo and behold, pretty soon, when he just rang the bell, the dogs salivated. Okay. So unconditional stimulus. And I'm going to write it in this it's kind of like an algorithm or an equation for it. I learned this in grad school, which I think really helped me. So unconditional stimulus, unconditional response, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response. I'm going to pair my two stimuluses together. So food, salivation, okay, excitement, bell, salivation, excitement. So if I pair my bell with the food, pretty soon they're going to have the same responses, okay? So one way that you can kind of help fill out the algorithm and learn it is that my responses are always the same, and my stimuluses are always what are paired together, okay? So Pavlov realized that anything that is associated with food is going to have the same response of hunger, salivation, and excitement, because that's already what was happening in his lab naturally. So he decided to then find a neutral stimulus, which is the bell. And every time he rang the bell before he fed the dogs, pretty soon the dogs pair the two stimuluses together, and it creates the same response. Okay? All right? So make sure you read and look at page 267. Okay? That's basically the foundation of classical conditioning. So we associate a stimulus response, and then pretty soon they have the same responses. Okay? All right. Now, operant conditioning over here is a little bit easier. It's a little more simple. Your two important names are E.L. Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Okay, Burris Frederick Skinner. All right, E.L. Thorndike actually came down with discovered the founding principles of operant conditioning, which is a vocab term in your book, which is called the law of effect. So Thorndike developed through his experience and observation of people the law of effect. And the law of effect is very simple, and none of us are going to disagree with it, but it basically says a behavior followed by something good is going to more likely to happen again. A behavior followed by something bad is less likely to happen again. Okay? So none of us are going to disagree with that. It's very simple, but it has profounding impacts on psychology. Okay? Now, Skinner read Thorndike's law of effect and completely agreed with it. And so what he then discovered is that I can control behavior then if I control what follows the behavior, because the law of effect says a behavior followed by something good. So if I can control the something good, will increase behavior. A behavior followed by something bad, I can control the something bad, will decrease the behavior, okay? Now, Skinner called that a consequence, okay? And because of classical conditioning in our society today, we associate a consequence with something negative, okay? But it was purely a neutral term with Skinner, all right? So he basically said that a behavior, if it's associated with the consequence that follows it, will either increase or decrease, okay? So Skinner basically said, going back to the law of effect, if I can control what follows the behavior, good or bad, I can control whether the behavior happens again or doesn't, okay? So here in operant conditioning, we're associating a behavior with what follows it or the consequence, okay? Now, Skinner very easily came up with two types of consequences. So if a behavior is followed by a reinforcement, it's going to increase the behavior. If a behavior is followed by a punishment, it's going to decrease the behavior, okay? So going back to law of effect, okay? A behavior followed by a reinforcement is more likely to happen again. Behavior followed by a punishment is less likely to happen again, okay? All right? So, and you guys already know that. You guys use this in your life. You have it used on you every day. I mean, our education system is huge into operant conditioning. If you babysit, you use it on the kids you babysit. If you have younger brothers and sisters, you use it in your relationships, at work. You have it used on you. Again, if you think back to your good old elementary days, you probably had a sticker chart or some type of chart to where if you got stickers or marks, it led to a prize, which is operant conditioning. That's a token economy, okay? So, you know, Skinner's theory based on Thorndike's law of effect is profoundly a huge impact on our behavior in our society, okay? Now, so with each type of consequence, reinforcement and punishment, I have two specific types, okay? And they have the same name. And one of the knocks on Skinner's theory is that his language, his verbiage is very confusing. And this is one, so you're gonna have to really pay attention to these. They have really good charts that summarize them on page 278 and 281, okay? There are two types of both. Positive means give. Negative means take away. So if I give a positive reinforcement, so I have a behavior that I like and I want it to happen again, I'm going to follow it by a positive reinforcement, which means I'm going to give them something good. So I'm going to give them a snack, a treat. I'm going to give them an extra story at bedtime. I'm going to give them money, okay? That's all positive reinforcement. So any behavior that is followed by that is probably more likely to happen again. And you can also think back to your dog, okay? Your dogs live and die by both of these, okay? Classical conditioning would be anytime the dog hears a doorbell, they associate it with somebody at your door, right? That's classical, okay? And then you obviously can teach them tricks by following what they do with a treat. So if the dog rolls over, I'm going to give it a treat. Positive reinforcement, he's more likely to roll over again, okay? Negative reinforcement is reinforcement, okay? I started this one because most people are going to confuse this with punishment. Negative reinforcement is I'm going to take away something bad, something that you don't like, so that I can increase the behavior. So if the class is good, during the class period, I'm going to take away the homework, okay? If you do the right things at home, you're going to get a chore taken away, okay? All right? So that's all still reinforcement, and it's going to increase the behavior, all right? It's just called negative reinforcement. So again, anything that says reinforcement increases a behavior. Anything that says punishment decreases it, okay? Positive is give, negative is take away, all right? So go to punishment. Okay, positive punishment means I'm going to give you something bad. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bad grade. Okay, I'm going to give you a tardy, a detention. Okay, that's positive punishment. Negative punishment, which is probably most of what your families use to discipline you, is when I'm going to take away something you like. So I'm going to take away your freedom. I'm going to take away your car. I'm going to take away your phone. Okay, that is still punishment, and it's still going to decrease the behavior. Okay. All right, so basically here, classical conditioning, we have associative learning. I'm associating a stimulus with a response using the formula. And then over here, I'm associating a behavior with what follows it or a consequence, okay? Behaviors followed by reinforcement are going to increase. Behaviors followed by punishment are going to decrease, okay? All right, so there you go. The foundational 3/4 of the entire unit number 6. And I could take a deep breath. I wanted to get here before we got to Christmas break, and we have done it. So again, make sure if you have extra credit, collaborate with your students, try to find the 7 items and the subliminal message and email those to me. Make sure you have this. And I would just go ahead and write this in for your learning targets. So I'm going to say this Monday and Tuesday. I'm going to leave this up here. I'm just going to tell you to write this in your AP notebook, and then you can number the learning targets as we go down it. Okay. All right. Have a good virtual Wednesday. If you need anything, email me. And then if we need to contact further, we can do Zoom for questions or to help you understand anything. Okay. Have a good day.